State Rome, Islam, European imperialism. A smaller group established a big empire. The Romans established the Roman Empire. The Arabs established the Arab Caliphate. Caliphate. Oh. Caliphate is leader. The Europeans split the European empires. An imperial culture is forced. Illegal copy of something in order to deceive. Fake. Greco-Roman culture, Arab Muslim, Western. The imperial culture is adopted by the subject peoples. The subject people adopt Latin Roman law, Roman political ideas. The subject people adopt Arabic Islam. The subject adopt English and French socialism, nationalism, human rights. The subject people demand equal status and the same of common imperial value. Illyrians, Gauls and Punics demand equal status with the Romans in the name of common Roman values. Egyptian, Iranians and Berbers demand equal status with the Arab in the name of common Muslim value. Indians, Chinese and Africans demand equal status with Europeans in the name of common Western value such as nationalism, socialism and human rights. The empire's founders lose their dominance. Romans cease to exist as a unique ethnic group. Control of empire passes to a new multi-ethnic elite. Arabs lose control of the Muslim world in favor of a multi-ethnic Muslim elite. Europeans lose control of the global world in favor of a multi-ethnic elite largely committed to Western values and ways of thinking. The imperial culture continues to flourish and develop. The Illyrians, Gauls and Punics continue to develop their adopted Romance culture. The Egyptians, Iranians and Berbers continue to develop their adopted Muslim culture. The Indians, Chinese and Africans continue to develop their adopted Western culture. During the 20th century, local groups that has adopted Western values claimed equally with their European conquerors in the name of these very values. Many anti-colonial struggles were waged under the banner of self-determination, socialism and human rights, all of which are Western legacy, just as Egyptians, Iranians and Turks adopted and adapted to imperial culture that they inherited from the original Arab conquerors. So today's Indians, Africans and Chinese have accepted much of the imperial culture of their former Western overlords while seeking to mold it in accordance with their needs and traditions. Good guys and bad guys in history. It is tempting to divide history neatly into good guys and bad guys, with all empires among the bad guys, for the vast majority of empires were founded on blood and maintain their power through oppression and war. Yes, most of today's cultures are based on imperial legacies. If empires are by definition bad, what does they say about us? There are schools of thought that political movements that seek to put human culture to imperialism, leaving behind what they claim is a pure, authentic civilization untainted by sin. These ideologies are the best naive. At worst, they serve as distinctionists window dressing for crude nationalism in biotree. Perhaps you could make a case that some of the myriad cultures that emerged at the dawn of recorded history were pure, untouched by sin, and unadulterated, unadulterated by other societies, but no culture since that dawn can reasonably make that claim. Certainly, no culture that exists now on earth. All human cultures are at least in part the legacy of empires and imperial civilizations, and no academic or political surgery can cut out the imperial legacy without killing the patient. Think, for example, about the love hate relationship between the independent Indian Republic of today and the British Raj. The British conquest and occupation of India cost the lives of millions of Indians and was responsible for the continuous humil- humiliation and exploitation of hundreds of millions more. Yet many Indians adopted with the jest of convert Western ideas such as self-determination and human rights, and were dismayed when the British refused to live up to their own declared values by granting native Indians either equal rights as British subjects or independence. Nevertheless, the modern Indian state is a child of the British Empire. The British killed, injured, and persecuted the inhabitants of the subcontinent, but they also united a bewildering mosaic of warring kingdoms, principalities, and tribes, creating a shared national consciousness and a country that functioned more or less as a single political unit. They laid the foundation of the Indian judicial system, created its administrative structure, and built the railroad network that was critical for economic integration. Independent India adopted Western democracy in its British incarnation. As a form of government, English is still the subcontinent's lingua franca, a neutral tongue that native speakers of Hindi, Tamil, and Malayalam can use to communicate. Indians are passionate cricket players and chai tea drinkers, and both game and beverage are British legacy. Commercial tea farming did not exist in India until the mid 19th century when it was introduced by the British East India Company. It was the snobbish British Sahibs who spread the custom of tea drinking throughout the subcontinent. The Chapat the Chhatrapati Shivaji train station in Mumbai. It began its life as Victoria Station, Bombay. The British built it in the neo-Gothic style that was popular in late 19th century Britain. A Hindu nationalist government changed the names of both city and station, but showed no appetite for raising such a magnificent building, even if it was built for foreign oppressors. How many Indians today would want to call a vote to divest themselves of democracy, English, the railway network, the legal system, cricket, and tea on the grounds that they are imperial legacy? And if they did, wouldn't the very act of calling a vote to decide the issue demonstrate their debt to the former overlords? The Taj Mahal, an example of authentic Indian culture, or the alien creation of Muslim imperialism. Even if we were to completely disavow the legacy of a brutal empire in the hope of reconstructing and safeguarding the authentic culture that preceded it, in all probability that we build by defending is nothing but the legacy of an older and no less brutal empire. Those who resent multi the mutilation the mutilation of Indian culture by the British run inadvertently sanctify the legacy of the Mughal Empire and conquering Sultanate of Delhi. And whoever attempts to rescue authentic Indian cultures from the alien influences of these Muslim empires sanctifies the legacy of the Gupta Empire, the Kushan Empire, and the Maurya Empire. If an extreme Hindu nationalist were to destroy all the buildings left by the British conquerors, such as Mumbai's main train station, what about the structures left behind Indians' Muslim conquerors, such as the Taj Mahal? Nobody really knows how to solve these thorny questions of cultural inheritance. Whatever path we take, the first step is to acknowledge the complexity to the dilemma and to accept that simplistically dividing the parts into good guys and bad guys leads nowhere. Unless, of course, we are willing to admit that we usually follow the lead of the bad guys. Situation in which a difficult choice has to be made between tiến thoái lưỡng nan. Dilemma.
Dilemma.
Ta bao điểm đến cuối cùng thấy sự không trùng. Dilemma. Tình thế tiến thoái lưỡng nan. Okay. The new global since around 200 BC, most humans have lived in empires. It seems likely that in the future, too, most humans will live in one, but this time the empire will be truly global. The imperial vision of dominion over the entire world could be imminent. As the 21st century unfolds, nationalism is fast losing ground. More and more people believe that all of humankind is the legitimate source of political authority rather than the member of a particular nationality, and that safeguarding human rights and protecting the interests of the entire human species should be the guiding light of politics. If so, having close to 200 independent states is a hindrance rather than a help. Since Swedes, Indonesians, and Nigerians deserve the same human rights, wouldn't it be simpler for a single global government to safeguard them? The appearance of essentially global problems such as melting ice caps nibbles away at whatever legitimacy remains to the independent nation states. No sovereign state would be able to overcome global warming on its own. The Chinese mandate of heaven was given by heaven to solve the problems of humankind. Cái gì ở người Trung Quốc cơ? Ủy chỉ. The modern mandate of heaven will be given by humankind to solve the problems of heaven, such the the hole in the ozone layer and the accumulation of greenhouse gases. The color of the global empire may well be green. As of 2014, the world is still politically fragmented, but states are fast losing their independence. Not only of them is really able to execute independent economic policy, to declare and wage wars as it pleases, or even to run its own internal affairs as it sees fit. States are increasingly open to the machinations of global markets, so the interference of global companies and NGOs into the supervision of global public opinion and the international judicial system. States are obliged to conform to global standards, to financial behaviors, environmental policy, and justice. Immensely powerful currents of capital, labor, and information turn and shape the world with a glowing disregard for the border and opinions of states. The global empire being forged before our eyes is not governed by any particular state or ethnic group. Much like the late Roman Empire, it is ruled by a multi-ethnic elite and is held together by a common culture and common interests. Throughout the world, more and more entrepreneurs, engineers, experts, scholars, lawyers, and managers are called to join the empire. They must ponder whether to answer the imperial call or to remain loyal to their state and their people. More and more choose the empire. The law of religion, luật lệ của tôn giáo. In the medieval market in Samarkand, a city built on Central Asian oxes, Syrian merchants ran their hands over fine Chinese silks. Frieze tribunals from the steppes displayed the latest batch of straw-haired slaves from the far west, and shopkeepers pocketed shiny gold coins imprinted with exotic scripts and the profiles of unfamiliar kings. Here, at one of that era's major crossroads between east and west, north and south, the unification of humankind was an everyday fact. The same process could be observed at work when Kublai Khan's army mustered to invade Japan in 1281. Mongol cavalrymen in skins and furs rubbed shoulders with Chinese foot soldiers in bamboo hats. Drunken Korean auxiliaries picked fights with tattooed sailors from the South China Sea. Engineers from Central Asia listened with dropping jaws to the tall tales of European adventures in own albeit to the command of a single emperor. Meanwhile, around the holy Kaaba in Mecca, human unification was proceeding by other means. Had you been a pilgrim to Mecca, cycling Islam's holiest shrine in the year 1300, you might have found yourself in the company of a party from Mesopotamia, their robes floating in the wind, their eyes blazing with ecstasy, and their mouths repeating one after the other the 99 names of God. Just ahead, you might have seen a weather-beaten Turkish patriarch from the Asian steppes, hobbling on a stick and stroking his back thoughtfully. To one side, gold jewelry shining against jet black skin might have been a group of Muslims from the African kingdom of Mali. The outer mouth clothed turmeric, cardamom, and sea salt would have signaled the presence of brother from India or perhaps from the mysterious Spice Islands further east. Today, religion is often considered as a sort of discrimination, disagreement, and disunion. Yet, in fact, religion has been the third great unifier of humankind alongside money and empire. Since all social orders and hierarchy are imagined, they are all fractal, and the larger the society, the more fractal it is. The crucial historical role of religion has been to give superhuman legitimacy to these fractal structures. Religions assert that our laws are not the result of human caprice but are or- ordained by an absolute and supreme authority. This helps place at least some fundamental laws beyond challenge, thereby ensuring social stability. Religion can thus be defined as a system of human norms and values that is founded on a belief in a superhuman order. This is involved two distinct criteria. Religion holds that there is superhuman order, which is not the product of human will or agreements. Professional football is not a religion because, despite its many laws, rites, and often bizarre rituals, everyone knows that human beings invented football themselves, and FIFA may at any moment enlarge the size of the goal or cancel the offside rule. Based on this superhuman order, religion established norms and values that it considers binding. Many Westerners today believe in ghosts, fairies, and reincarnation, but these beliefs are not a source of moral and behavioral standards. As such, they do not constitute a religion. Despite the ability to legitimize widespread social and political orders, not all religions have actual this potential. In order to unite it under its aegis a large expanse of territory inhabited by disparate groups of human beings, a religion must possess two further qualities. First, it must espouse a universal superhuman order that is true always and everywhere. Second, it must insist on spreading this belief to anyone. In other words, it must be universal and missionary. The West known religions of history, such as Islam and Buddhism, are universal and missionary. Consequently, people tend to believe that all religions are like them. In fact, the majority of ancient religions were local and exclusive. Their followers believed in local deities and spirits and had no interest in converting the entire human race. As far as we know, universal and missionary religions began to appear only in the first millennium BC. Their emergence was one of the most important revolutions in history and made a vital contribution to the unification of humankind, much like the emergence of universal empires and universal money. Silencing the lambs. Con cừu làm cho con cừu nín. When animism was the dominant belief system, human norms and values had to take into consideration the outlook and interests of a multitude of other beings, such as animals, plants, fairies, and ghosts. For example, a forager's band in the Ganges Valley may have established a rule forbidding people to cut down a particular large fig trees, lest the fig tree spirits become angry and take revenge. another foragers band living in the Indus Valley may have forbidden people from hunting white-tailed foxes because a white-tailed fox once revealed to a wise old woman where the band might find precious obsidian. Such religions tended to be very local in outlook and to emphasize the unique features of specific locations, climates, and phenomena. Most foragers spend their entire lives within an area of no more than 1,000 square kilometers. In order to survive, the inhabitants of particular valley needed to understand the superhuman order that regulated their valley and to adjust their behavior accordingly. It was pointless to try to convince the inhabitants of some distant valley to follow the same rules. The people of the Indus did not bother to send missionaries of the gangs to convince locals not to hunt white-tailed foxes. The agricultural revolution seems to have been accompanied by a religious revolution. Hunter-gatherers picked and pursued wild plants and animals, which could be seen as equal in status to Homo sapiens. The fact that men hunted sheep did not make sheep inferior to men, just as the fact that tigers hunted men did not make the men inferior to tigers. Being communicated with one another directly and negotiated rules governing their shared habitat. In contrast, farmers owned and manipulated plants and animals and could hardly degrade themselves by negotiating with their possessions. Hence, the first religious effect of the agricultural revolution was to turn plants and animals from equal members of a spiritual round table into property. This, however, created a big problem. Farmers may have desired absolute control of their sheep, but they knew perfectly well that their control was limited. They could lock the sheep in pens, castrate rams, and selectively breed ewes. Yet they could not ensure that the ewes conceived and gave birth to healthy lambs. Nor could they prevent the eruption of the deadly epidemics. How then to safeguard the fecundity of female sheep, especially an adult one, is an
you, you,
you,
you, you,
you, you. Không thể biết à. You,
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 you. Breed ewes. Yet they could not ensure that the ewes conceived and gave birth to healthy lambs, nor could they prevent the eruption of deadly epidemics. How then safeguard fecundity of the flocks? The flocks, it means a band. Fecundity.
fecundity,
Fecundity of the flocks. The ability to produce a lot of crops, fruit, babies, young animals. Mánh đẻ. A leading theory about the origin of the gods argues that God gained importance as gods. They offered a solution to this problem. Gods such as the fertility goddess, gods such as the fertility goddess, the sky god, and the god of medicine took center stage when plants and animation lost their ability to speak. And the god's main role was to mediate between humans and the mute plants and animals. Much of ancient mythology is in fact a legal contract in which humans promise everlasting devotion to the gods in exchange for mastery over plants and animals. The first chapter of the book of Genesis are a prime example. For thousands of years after the agricultural revolution, religious liturgy consisted mainly of human sacrificing lambs, wine, and cakes to divine powers, who in exchange promised abundant harvest and fecund flocks. The agricultural revolution initially had a far smaller impact on the status of other members of the enemy system, such as rocks, springs, ghosts, and demons. However, these two gradually lost status in favor of the new gods as long as people lived their entire lives within limited territories of a few hundred square kilometers. Most of their needs could be met by local spirits. But once kingdoms and trade networks expanded, people need to contact entities whose power and authority encompassed a whole kingdom or an entire trade basin. The attempt to answer these needs led to the appearance of polytheistic religions, from the Greek poly equal to many, theos equal to God. The religions understood the world to be controlled by a group of powerful gods such as the fertility goddess, the rain god, and the water god. Human could appeal to these gods, and the gods might, if they received devotion and sacrifice, designed to bring rain, victory, and health. Animism did not entirely disappear at the advent of polytheism. Demons, fairy gods, holy rocks, holy springs, and holy trees remain an integral part of almost all polytheist religions. These spirits were far less important than the great gods, but for the mundane needs of many ordinary people, they were good enough. While the king in his capital city sacrificed dozens of fat rams to the great war god, praying for victory over the barbarians, the peasant in his hut lit a candle to the fig tree's fairy, praying that she had cured his sick son. Yet the greatest impact of rise of great gods was not only sheep or demons, but upon the status of Homo sapiens. Animists thought that humans were just one of many creatures inhabiting the world. Polytheists, on the other hand, increasingly saw the world as a reflection of the relationship between gods and humans. Our prayers, our sacrifice, our sins, and our God did determine the fate of the entire ecosystem. A terrible flood might wipe out billions of ants, grasshoppers, turtles, antelopes, giraffes, and elephants, just because a few stupid sapiens made the gods angry. Polytheism thereby exalted not only the status of the gods but also that of humankind. Less fortunate members of the old animist system lost their stature and became either extra or silent decor in the great drama of man's relationship with the gods. The benefits of idolatry. Idolatry, không cần gì đến idol ha. Idolatry.
Idolatry.
Idolatry. Lợi ích của thần tượng. Lợi ích của thần thánh hả? Cũng gần giống nghĩa của từ đầu tiên. Two thousand years of monotheistic
Monotheistic.
Years of monotheistic brainwashing have caused most Westerners to see polytheism as ignorant and childish idolatry. This is an unjust stereotype. In order to understand the inner logic of polytheism, it is necessary to grasp the central idea buttressing the belief in many gods. Polytheism does not necessarily dispute the existence of a single power or law governing the entire universe. In fact, most polytheists and even animist religions recognize such a supreme power that stands behind all the different gods, demons, and holy rocks. In classical Greek polytheism, Zeus, Hera, Apollo, and their colleagues were subject to an omnipotent and all-encompassing power, fate, Moira, Anarchy. Nordic gods too were in thrall to fate, which doomed them to perish in the cataclysm of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. Chạng vạng, twilight. Chạng vạng. In the polytheistic. Yeah. In fact, most polytheists and even animist religions recognize such a supreme power that stands behind all the different gods, demons, and holy rocks. In classical Greek polytheism, Zeus, Hera, Apollo, and their colleagues were subject to an omnipotent and all-encompassing power. Fate, Moira, and Nordic gods too were in thrall to fate, which doomed them to perish in the cataclysm of Ragnarok, the twilight of gods.
Colleagues.
Paris in the Catholicism around all gods were born of the supreme God Olodumare and remain subjects to him. In Hindu polytheism, a single principle, Atman controls the myriad gods and spirits, humankind, in the biological and physical world. Atman is the external essence of soul to the entire universe, as well as of every individual and every phenomenon. The fundamental insight of polytheism, which is distinguishes from monotheism, is that the supreme power governing the world is devoid of interest and biases, and therefore it is unconcerned with the mundane desires, cares, and worries of human. It is pointless to ask this power for victory in war, for hail or for rain, because from its all-encompassing vantage point, it makes no difference whether a particular kingdom wins or loses, whether a particular city prospers or whether a particular person recuperates or dies. The Greeks did not waste any sacrifice on fate, and Hindus built no temple to Atman. The only reason to approach the supreme power of the universe would be to renounce all desire and be placed at the bed along with the good, to embrace even defeat, poverty, sickness, and death. Thus, some Hindus, known as sadhus or sannyasis, devote their lives to uniting with Atman, thereby achieving enlightenment. They strive to see the world from the viewpoint of these fundamental principles, to realize that from its eternal perspective, all mundane desires and fears are meaningless and ephemeral phenomena. Most Hindus, however, are not sadhus. They are sunk deep in the morass of mundane concerns, where Atman is not much help for assistance in such matters. Hindus approach the gods with the partial power, precisely because their powers are partial rather than all-encompassing. Gods such as Ganesha, Lakshmi, and Saraswati have interests and biases. Humans can therefore make deals with these partial powers and rely on their help in order to win wars and recuperate from illness. There are necessarily many of these smaller powers, and once you start dividing all up the all-encompassing power of a supreme principle, you'll inevitably end up with more than one deity. Hence, the plurality of gods. The insight of polytheism is conducive to far-reaching the religious tolerance, since polytheists believe, on the other hand, in one supreme and completely disinterested power, and on the other hand in many partial and biased powers. There is no difficulty for the devotee of one god to accept the existence and efficacy of other gods. Polytheism is inherently open-minded and rarely persecutes heretics and infidels. Even when polytheists conquered huge empires, they did not try to convert their subjects. The Egyptians, the Romans, and the Aztecs did not send missionaries to foreign lands to spread the worship of Osiris, Jupiter, or Huitzilopochtli, the chief Aztec god, and they certainly didn't dispatch army to that purpose. Subjects people throughout the empire were expected to respect the empire's gods and rituals, since the gods and rituals protected and legitimized the empires. Yet they were not required to give up their local gods and rituals. In the Aztec Empire, subjects people were obliged to build temples for Huitzilopochtli, but these temples were built alongside those of local gods, rather than in their stead. In many cases, the imperial elite itself adopted the gods and rituals of subject people. The Romans happily added the Asian goddess Cybele and the Egyptian goddess Isis to their pantheon. The only god that the Romans long refused to tolerate was the monotheistic and evangelizing of God of the Christians. The Roman empires did not require the Christians to give up their beliefs in rituals, but it did expect them to pay respect to the empire's protector, gods, and to the divinity of the emperor. This was seen as a declaration of political loyalty when the Christians vehemently refused to do so and went on to reject all attempts at compromise. The Romans reacted by persecuting what they understood to be a political subversive faction, and even this was done half-heartedly. In the 300 years from the crucifixion of Christ to the conversion of Emperor Constantine, polytheistic Roman emperors in initiated no more than 4 general persecutions of Christians. Local administrators and governors incited some anti-Christian violence of their own. Still, if we combine all the victims of all these persecutions, it turns out that in these 3 centuries, the polytheistic Roman killed no more than a few thousand Christians. In contrast, over the course of the next 850 years, Christians slaughtered Christians by the millions to defend slightly different interpretations of the religions of love and compassion. The religious wars between Catholics and Protestants were swept Europe in the 16th and 17th century are particularly notorious. All those involved accepted in Christ's divinity and his gospel of compassion and love. However, they disagree about the nature of this love. Protestants believe that the divine love is so great that God was incarnated in flesh and allowed himself to be tortured and crucified, thereby redeeming the original sin and opening the gates to heaven to all those who professed faith in him. Catholics maintain that faith, while essential, was not enough to enter heaven. Believers had to participate in church rituals and do good deeds. Protestants refused to accept this, arguing that this quid pro quo belittles God's grace and love. Whoever thinks that entry to heaven depends upon his or her own good deeds magnifies his own importance and implies that Christ's suffering on the cross and God's love for humankind are not enough. The theological disputes turned so violent that during the 16th and 17th centuries, Catholics and Protestants killed each other by the hundreds of thousands. On 23 August 100 on August 1572, French Catholics who stressed the importance of good deeds attacked communities of French Protestants who highlighted God's love for humankind. In this attack, the Saint Bartholomew's Days massacre between 5,000 and 10,000 Protestants was slaughtered in the less than 24 hours. When the Pope when the Pope in Rome heard the news from France, he was so overcome by joy that he organized festive prayers to celebrate the occasion and commissions Giorgio Vasari to decorate one of the Vatican's rooms with a fresco of the massacre. The room is currently off limits to visitors. More Christians were killed by fellow Christians in those 24 hours than by the polytheistic Roman Empire throughout its entire existence. God is one. Được bao nhiêu phần trăm rồi? 50 chưa? Ta bao điểm đến cuối cùng. God is one. Ok. Đến đây.